Hello, everyone. This is Umar Qureshi with my co-host, a wonderful educator who is the president of ASED, Tammy, with us. And as usual, we are again with you with a wonderful educationist with us, a wonderful person who has a lot of advocacy in education. But before Tammy, you take over and you introduce the guest to the viewers. I would like to tell you all that this show is exclusively for the education, for the educators, for the people who want to understand how educationists work, how they think, how they plan, how they execute it. It's a wonderful show, and we are thankful to our worthy and wonderful distinguished guests who always give us time and are always with us. Over to you, Tammy.
Awesome. Thanks, Umair. It's nice to see you. Hi, Starr. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Morning and evening, I guess, depending where we are. So I just wanted to introduce Starr Sackstein. She is one of our emerging leader family members. And so I believe that you and Umair are from the same class, which is pretty cool. Starr is a director of humanities in West Hempstead Schools in New York. So I'm going to just hand it over to you, Starr, and tell us a little bit about your role.
So currently, as the director of humanities, I am responsible for English, social studies, world language, business, reading, library, K-12 in my district. And essentially what that means is I get to work with amazing teachers and help kids make engaging learning environments and really consider more interdisciplinary approaches to teaching. That's kind of where we are right now. And I'm really excited to do the work that I do with those teachers every day.
That's a really exciting role. It sounds like a lot, though, that's for sure. K-12, it's a big job. Can you also tell us a bit about your affiliation with ASED and the work that you do with the organization?
Sure. So I was fortunate to be an emerging leader in 2016, but prior to that, I had written a book with them about teaching students to self-assess and reflect. And then more currently, I've written a book about peer feedback in the classroom with them. I present at the conferences usually, and I'm really proud to be a part of that organization. They've been super good to me, and it's nice to be a part of an organization where there are so many talented and really smart people working all the time. So.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of really smart people. Sometimes I'm like, it's amazing to just know so many people in different roles and from different places and all the really awesome work that's happening in schools. And so you had mentioned writing about assessment. So that's kind of like the name of our show is The Game of Assessment. So can you talk a little bit about some of the writing that you do around assessment and why you chose to go write about assessment? Because, it's not everybody's favorite thing. So,
well, I think it was my utter disdain for the way assessment is generally handled that kind of got me into this field. And it wasn't really until my own child, who's now 13, started in like elementary school, and they were doing standards-based grading in my local district. And I would get report cards back and I would see how he was doing. And I was always impressed with the precision they were able to share with me about his learning. And at the time I was teaching AP Lit and newspaper, so 11th and 12th grade English mostly. And I had one letter grade that I was allowed to put on a report card. And it was really like, it started to feel like that just wasn't adequate to communicate what was going on in the classroom. And I think the more I got disheartened by what was going on, I started needing to find alternative ways, sort of joking all the time that my superpower is finding loopholes and being able to exploit them in a way that makes good for kids. And so the more time I worked with the kids, we were able to establish a whole other system around how learning could be about reflection and feedback, and how it didn't have to be about a letter or a number. And I stopped giving tests in my classroom. It was all project-based learning and papers and a lot of collaborative kind of assignments, as well as opportunities to revise and grow as learners. And the more I handed to the kids, the more they impressed me with what they were able to do. And even my more reticent learners were able to take on ownership of what was going on in that space. And once I kind of went all in, I never looked back again. So, and then the books kind of came from that experience. So, you know, whether it was the reflection, the sort of the process I had put in place for teaching kids to assess, and that was my first Arias with ASCD. And then the peer feedback was something I had started in my newspaper class with kids and brought into my AP class afterwards. And then Hacking Assessment was the book that kind of talked about the whole journey of going gradeless in general.
That's really awesome. Thank you. We will also put up some links to your books as well after the show, and we have our YouTube link available so people can take a look at those. So I'm kind of not sure which question to ask next because they both fit so well, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So just thinking about how what your process has been in making the shift from like to gradeless and moving to projects. So now when you're working with teachers in your new role and in the past, what kind of mindsets are you seeing and hearing about assessment in general? And just, you know, like, because I know it's a hard shift to have to make and think more open-minded about how to grade and what do I do and all of these things. So what are the kinds of things that you're encountering in your role?
Okay, so I just want to step back a second and say that when I was doing it in the classroom, I was largely alone and was dealing with colleagues who really weren't ready to make the shifts that I was making, even though we shared students. And I mean, I was kind of off the charts for most of my colleagues. They respected what I was doing. They saw the work that I was doing and they saw what the kids were learning. But I don't think a lot of my colleagues were really ready to make those same kinds of shifts. And now in the role that I'm in, I think I see that a lot as well. Many of the teachers I work with are veteran teachers who have been in the district for way longer than I've even been teaching, like 20 plus years, and they've never taught anywhere else. And the district, you know, has been doing things a certain way for a long time, and we're really shaking things up in the last couple of years. And I just think that there's a lot of change happening at once. So I would say that the teachers sort of fall on a spectrum. I have some teachers who have brought in, they're doing phenomenal project-based things. They've rethought their curriculum. They're really bringing the kids into the mix. And when they started to make that shift, the assessment had to follow because you can't really do that kind of work and then grade it, at least not the traditional way. And then there are other folks who are still challenged by the whole notion of not working with deadlines or penalizing or, you know, the compliance nature that kind of goes with grades instead of looking at what kids know and can do. And, you know, there's still an idea of accountability that's really, really big. And I get it. You know, I don't want to diminish their challenge in any way, shape, or form. I've been there. I know what that's like. And everybody comes in their own time. I kind of feel like it's not something that happens for everyone right away. So I always try to provide them opportunities to see other ways. I offer to go into their classrooms. I offer to co-plan with them, co-teach, model, do whatever I can to lessen the discomfort of the change that is coming. But they're all where they are, and some, like I said, some are coming along easier than others. And, you know, it's a work in progress, and I believe that we will get there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it's nice to know that they do have you, which, you know, when you were going through the process, you did have that feeling of loneliness, which I know a lot of teachers do. But we have to remember that we actually are not in this alone. So I guess that's why we have our networks that help us out. So my next question is semi-unrelated, but I did want to ask you about well, it's related, of course, but, you know, just a slight tangent. I was taking a peek at your TEDx youth talk that was called A Recovering Perfectionist Journey to Giving Up Grades. And so I wanted to ask you about that experience and why you thought, well, and you've kind of already answered this, but why did you think that was an idea worth sharing with the youth in particular?
Well, I think that a lot of times when we think about grades and we think about what the system is doing to kids, what we are doing to kids, a lot of times we fail to recognize the power we have in different ways and how that power can be used to discourage learning instead of promote it. I do not believe that teachers do this intentionally, and I do not believe that the system does it intentionally. I think that there is a level of efficiency that comes with grades. It's certainly simpler to give a grade, and if there's a matrix for deciding how many points means something, and that's clearly shared with students, I think that, you know, there's an appearance of value to that. However, if there's something I've learned as an English teacher is that very seldom do those grades mean the same thing, even across a department. Unless you're a math or a science person and there's actual numbers being used, it's very hard to decide what an exemplary piece of work looks like and then have 5 to 10 English teachers agree on that.
Right.
You know, some people focus on what I consider to be minutia, like mechanics, and then there are other people who are worried more about big ideas and organization and how well they're communicating those deeper thoughts, which to me are more important than how well their mechanics come across, unless of course the mechanics are so bad that you can't even understand what's going on. That's a different story altogether. But I think as educators, it's our biggest role to really engage kids with the learning and get them excited and empowered in the work that they do so that they want to keep pushing and doing the revision, and the atmospheres that we create to do that are what promote that kind of learning. And I feel that grades is the biggest barrier to that. When we start labeling kids, they do not get the benefit of knowing that they are more than that number. And as a person who used to, you know, I was an A student, and that's the TED Talk kind of starts there. You know, I was that type A kid who wanted my grades. I was an honor student, the whole 9 yards. I missed out on so many learning opportunities because I was so focused on just pleasing my teachers and kind of competing instead of really taking in everything. And it wasn't until I got to grad school that till I really understood the difference. Really.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I agree.
So I just want to ask one thing, Tammy, with your permission.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Starr, it's wonderful. It's wonderful explanation of giving these grades and everything. But let's go let's dig down more. You know, I have a couple of questions. And advocacy everywhere. Who the ones who are striving hard for the reforms and assessment, they are struggling with the local cultures as well. So in this games of assessment, we have generally the summative and the formative assessment, and the formative assessment has further to not exactly with the boundaries, but there is assessment for learning and assessment as learning. Now coming to the first part, do you really think, is this entirely due to culture that the grades are overwhelmingly, you know, accepted and loved in almost all cultures, or they actually support the educators in education, or what is that actually? Why they are loved so much?
I think that's a really tough question to answer. I think on some level, grades are definitely powerful. It helps teachers and systems keep kids in order. When you issue a grade, you are labeling a child, you are determining who is better than somebody else. And when you're trying to keep order and management in a space and you have something to wield, like a grade, points taken off, points added, I think it's a very good way to control people. And they do it with teachers too. So again, I don't want to, it's not just a single tier problem. In the States, you know, we get evaluated in New York as educators, which I don't think is right either. Student test scores shouldn't be a part of the matrix for deciding how effective a teacher is. I think that teaching and learning are both arts and sciences. There is so much nuance and complexity to doing those things that affixing a particular number or score just really diminishes it. It is easier. It is certainly, like I said earlier, efficient. And a lot of people ask me, what about college admissions? If a college admission board had to actually review portfolios for the numbers of applicants that they get, that would be a very time-consuming thing, as opposed to just looking at a transcript and scores, which kind of really force everybody into this very small box. And what it essentially does is it gives kids who shouldn't be knocked out of the running, they get knocked out, and then the kids that are at the top who have had more opportunities to achieve, they get all of the opportunities. So there's a real equity imbalance when it comes to grading as well, that sometimes we don't even realize we're doing to kids, just based on the opportunities they have outside of school as well to support their learning that not all kids get.
I would like to add one thing here, and thank you for answering so briefly about the whole concept. In Pakistan, we are suffering from grades and assessments, and what we feel that many of the educators feel that the lust of grades and the race for the grades and the marks has led the whole system towards the corruption as well, because it's all about the competition, and everything is, as per the beliefs, everything is allowed in competition. Now let me come to another point. We talk about the PLCs, we talk about the communities for the teachers. There is I have seen in some of the professional development workshops that people do start with the assessment for learning, but eventually it lands in the lap of assessment of learning when the moment they start getting the grades. So how do you think, and the recent idea is that assessment as learning, how do you discriminate them? How do you draw the boundaries between assessment for learning and assessment as learning?
Okay, so I get the idea with the summative. I get it. I think a summative assessment is a snapshot. It's a moment in time. And part of the problem with summative assessment is that moment doesn't last very long. When we think about assessment for learning, it is a more iterative process that puts a lot of emphasis on the doing and the redoing and the actual nuts and bolts of what goes on. There's a lot of opportunity for the teachers to see what kids know and can do, and then provide better, more focused feedback to make that learning better. Do I think that summative assessment is all bad all the time? No. I don't think it should be done quite as much as it is done, especially in the standardized testing vein. I think summative assessment could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be a test. At some point, we have to determine whether or not kids met the criteria for the level of where they're at. And if we've decided that that's over the span of a year, let's say, for example, in a system like in New York, where you are in grade levels, and we decide that this is what you need to move on to the next grade, then they shouldn't be getting intermediary sort of summatives necessarily. It should be a progression on and on until we meet to that point, because every kid takes a different amount of time to get there. And I've heard some people talk about like a gamified sort of system where when kids meet the mark, they're allowed to move up instead of just waiting till the end of the year, whereas other kids who might take a little longer can take a little longer to do that. And I think that when we start crawling down this rabbit hole, what ends up happening is we realize the entire system is broken the way that it is, and we need to rethink the structures that are in place. And the assessment, summative or formative, is just a very small part of that. And once we could see that bigger picture actually changing, then everything else can be adjusted to better suit each child as they move through the process, if that makes any good sense.
Yeah, very much.
So, Starr, what are some words of advice that you can give teachers around their assessment practices, especially when the teachers who are actually pigeonholed into the schools' mandates and the procedures for doing assessments, there's a lot of pressure. Do you suggest any frameworks for them? Do you suggest anything and any words for them?
Well, I think most teachers need to ask, what am I assessing? What is the point of what we're doing right now? And that's not a conversation they should have in isolation. That's a conversation that should be had with the students in their spaces. Even as young as kindergarten, they can articulate what they're learning, or they should be. The whole notion of visible learning, of the how and why and what we're doing, is so important for kids, so that they can feel empowered in the spaces that they're in. So my first question would just be is, what are we supposed to be getting out of this? And are we? And, making sure there's clear success criteria so that kids know it before they start, so that they know what the target is. And then really adjust practice, the day-to-day instruction, based on what you learn from those experiences. Because the instruction needs to change if we want the assessment to change. And it can't just be, instruction for the sake of a standardized test. That's just a very failed way of looking at this. And when we expect teachers to only make their kids achieve on those particular tests, it's a lose-lose for everybody involved. So we really just need to be asking ourselves why a lot more, and be very, very, very intentional about the kind of assessments we put in front of kids, and then what we do with them after the fact.
So do you suggest any framework that the teachers who want to shift from less grading to more learning, bringing some new rules to the games?
Start with feedback. Have kids know what the standards are. Involve the standards in your lessons when you're writing learning targets. Make sure the kids really understand very, very clearly what's going on. Make sure they know the articulation for the entire unit as well, so there's a backward design element. And don't make it a secret, Ask the kids to participate in what's going on. Get their feedback along the way. And if you could change one thing, even if you have to give a grade at the end of it, delay the grade as long as you can. Make it more about the feedback, make it more about the learning, and give them a chance to reflect, so that you could get inside their head a little bit and see the stuff that might not come off on the page. So if you could give them a framework to explain what they feel they've learned and what they struggled with, you'll be able to help them better moving forward.
Yeah, this reminds me of my schooling time. When I was in grade 6, my teacher used to come and say, today we are going to have a surprise test. So that
Yay.
always used to, confuse me, that because for me, test is itself surprising, and adding more surprise to just like making more spicy to a spicy food. It goes like that. Anyway, over to you, Tammy.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing. If only my teachers had had this way of thinking during my schooling as well, because I'm not a great test taker, and I'm still not. Not that I've had to take a test, that recently, but, even when you're taking your teacher certification exams, it's like, you just get all those feelings back of like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to go. It's very stressful, and it's not good for us. That's for sure. We're getting fairly near the end of our show, so I wanted to ask you what you're reading now, or what you're writing about.
So I'm reading a bunch of different things. I'm listening to Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell on my Audible. So it's ever since I discovered Audible, it has increased the amount of learning that has happened for me. I'm reading Hacking Instructional Design by Mike and Elizabeth Fisher, which is fantastic, and I can't wait to share it with the folks that I'm working with. And also Dan Tricarico, I think, Tricario, I always mispronounce his name, the Zen teacher. He has a second book called Sanctuaries, which is all about balancing everything. And I'm super bad with balance, so always looking for different ways to sort of get that practice in there. And I'm currently working on a book about learning centers with one of the teachers in my district. So lots of stuff happening at once.
That sounds good. Yeah, I tend to have an Audible book going as well. And then professional book in my hand and then also a fiction book so that I can mix it up. I just wanted to say hello to Phil, my emerging leader mentee. He's making some great comments. It's nice to have some really helpful comments this week. So that's nice. Thank you. And it looks like a couple of other people have made a couple of comments, which is nice to see. So I think to wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to share with us, Starr, before I share a quote from one of the brilliant minds in assessment? One of the other brilliant minds in assessment, I should say.
I always just want to implore teachers to think about the children that are in front of them, and then also think about their own experiences when they get evaluated. We are all so much more than just a number, that we need to be promoting the things that make us unique and special, and not rating them in an order of most importance. We kind of need to embrace all of it and find a way to get those areas to shine. And I think we can all agree that grades just aren't that method. So
yeah, I would like to add one thing, Tammy, before you move on. We have wonderful comments today on this show, and obviously people were waiting for this show. Phil, thank you very much for being with us. Asma is from Pakistan, and I know her personally as well. She's a wonderful educator, and she's struggling a lot for the assessment and, bringing changes in education practices in Pakistan. So yeah, Tammy, carry on.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I found this quote by Dylan William, who has written a lot on formative assessment. It's a little bit long, but I thought it was would end the show well. He wrote in his book, Embedded Formative Assessment, the key features of effective learning environments are that they create student engagement and allow teachers, learners, and their peers to ensure that the learning is proceeding in the intended direction, which Starr was just talking about. The only way we can do this is through assessment. That is why assessment is indeed the bridge between teaching and learning. So I just thought that would be a great kind of sum up to the show, especially when we're talking about this huge, important topic of assessment and the importance of good assessment and not just focusing on those numbers and letters. So thank you very much, Starr, for being on the show today. It was really great to chat with you.
And before we move on, Tammy, you have to share anything else?
I could share next week's guest if you would like, or should it be a surprise?
Right. So, Starr, thank you very much for your show, for coming up and showing up on the show. And for the viewers who are with us, do like our YouTube channel. We have wonderful educators with us, and this is not the last show on assessment. We will be having more educators, and Starr, we will invite you again on the show. Do share the links. We will be sharing the YouTube channel link in a while once this show is uploaded there. And I would request the educators who are in our network, do join us, do share the links. We need to, educators work in network. It's like a honeybee system, or like a honeycomb, the people communicating through their, their wings. So we will be sharing the links, and thank you all for being with us, and your appreciation and your comments and your questions and your support do give us a lot of energy. Thank you, Starr. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Starr.
Have a good day, everyone.